Please remind me to shorten that bio before I send anyone in next time. Good morning, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. I took a little liberties with changing my title when I sat down late last week and looked at that I was going to be in a session that was really focused on climate change and resilience. And so I'm not so much focusing on water quality that you have published in your program. Instead, I thought I'd switch things around a little bit. Just to give you a little bit of background on NRCS, because some of you may not know the Natural Resources Conservation Service. It's about a $4 billion a year program with about 11,000 employees. And one of the things we're really proud about, and one of the things that's really critical for us in meeting our mission, is the fact that over 90% of those people are located out in the field. We have people located in almost every single county in the U.S. Most of these have backgrounds in soils, agronomy, range engineering, and other biological disciplines. And a real focus of our conservation planning efforts, working with landowners, is that we have to ensure everything has a real strong scientific basis. As a real private lands focus, and it's also these are voluntary programs. We recognize the value and the strength of the regulatory approach, but we also feel like that since all these lands are privately owned, over 70% of the lands in the U.S. are privately owned, that these are the ones that are going to really be making the difference for our natural resources. So the mission of the agency is helping people help the land. Vision is a productive, sustainable ag that's in balance with a high-quality environment. And achieving that balance, we're recognizing, is really critical for us, particularly as we're looking at what's going to be happening in the next several years. We've been told by certain experts that we're going to have to grow as much food in the next 40 years that we've grown collectively in the last 500 in order to be able to sustain the level of population growth that's predicted, going over just 7 billion people to over 9 billion people in the world by the year 2050. At the same time, this is what's happening to our land available for ag production. This is toggling back and forth from 1982 through 2007. In that 25-year period, we've lost 41 million acres of rural land to development. 23 million acres of that was active agricultural land. 14 million acres of that was prime farmland, that land that's best for growing our food to meet the needs of this burgeoning population. So at the same time that we have to grow all this food for this burgeoning population, we are also asking more and more of our cropping systems. And this still carries that whole theme of resilience. We're asking that they also help us reduce our dependence on foreign oil. Here we're growing bioenergy crops. This is National Pollinator Week, if you all don't know it. This week is National Pollinator Week. And so there's a resilience factor there too. We need to design our cropping systems that are also mindful of the habitat needs of our pollinators, because about a third of our food supply relies on these pollinators. Now, farmers have always been interested and have always been appreciative and been driven towards addressing water quality with everything they do. I mean, most all farmers drink from wells, right? Their families drink from wells. But as we have more and more urbanization that's moving onto the rural landscape, this becomes an even greater issue. And of course, water use efficiency. All these farmers are also very mindful of that, and that's a huge part of building resiliency of our production systems, is using techniques that use what limited water resources we have available in the most efficient way possible. And then we get nature throwing us certain curveballs, right? We had the historic drought of 2012. Many parts of the U.S. are still undergoing a drought. But do you remember what was happening throughout the central U.S. in 2011? Floods. Major flood events in 2011, the previous year. So again, it's a focus on resiliency that we need. It's been really well documented now that temperatures are increasing. They're increasing throughout the globe. The dark lines that you see here are actually observations, where the others are model estimates and the standard error around those model estimates. And this is what has all of us excited, this rise in temperature that's gone on just in the last decade or so. But our models are telling us something even more dramatic. They're telling us that this is what's coming. So I made the point earlier, I think it can't be understated, that with 70% of our land under the management of our farmers and ranchers, other landowners, these are the ones that are going to make the difference for our natural resources. These are the people that are going to make the difference for helping us meet these challenging needs. One of our primary tools that we use in Natural Resources Conservation Service is conservation planning, sitting down, working directly with those landowners to develop plans for addressing their needs. Now, the Conservation Practice Standard is one of those tools that we use to implement those. Now, these standards are basically built from what's in the peer-reviewed literature, but they're also built from common experience, working with grants, with just working with landowners, plot studies, a number of other sources of data. But the primary source is what's in the peer-reviewed literature. I occasionally get those snake oil salesmen come through my office trying to sell us a new product, trying to get it implemented into a conservation practice standard. They come in with nice glossy photographs, bar charts. Guess what? There's no standard errors around those bar charts. There's no, confidence intervals. There's, significance levels, but it's a pretty bar chart. And I tell them to get it, I encourage them to get it published in the peer-reviewed literature because that's really kind of our gold standard. So if you're not familiar with NRCS programs, I should probably take an aside and kind of bring you up to speed on that. So the way that this works, and this is kind of an oversimplified view, but basically the way it works is that when we incorporate, the latest research into our conservation practice standards, well, then we enter into contracts essentially with landowners. Is that if you follow this practice standard that research has showed to be beneficial for like water quality, nutrient management, nutrient use efficiency, wildlife habitat, whatever the practice standard is, and we have about 160 of them, well, then we will help fund usually 50 to 75% of the implementation of that. And so that's a taxpayer's investment because there's that greater public value of that investment, like water quality, right? If farmers implement good nutrient management on their land, then the whole public benefits from the enhanced water quality. And so that's really the kind of the way that these works. And so we'll take information like this, like I've shown here, it's kind of accumulated a number of different studies from Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, in corn, soybean rotations over a number of different years and depths, different soils, looking at soil organic carbon increases in conventional till versus no-till. And you can see that we've increased carbon. This is an example of why that carbon in that soil is important. We were actually increasing the available water holding capacity of that soil by increasing the carbon content in the soil. So what rain you do get is more effective, so guess what? You got more resilient production system. Now this looks kind of Mickey Mouse, but what I've also had some of our scientists do, our atmospheric scientists do, is look at all of our 160 of our conservation practice standards and evaluate them and give them this kind of qualitative ranking for their impact on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and increasing carbon sequestration. And what that basically allows them to do is go through a list. We've rated every one of our 160 standards, and they can, if a grower comes in or if we've got a particular initiative for increasing carbon sequestration, reducing greenhouse gases, then we have a list of all those practice standards, and these are hot linked. So all they have to do is click on it, and then the standard pops up, and they can use that working with the landowner to address those resource issues. Now, I need to also emphasize that I've really been talking about practices singly, but the reality is when we're developing comprehensive plans, conservation plans, they are comprehensive. So we're really looking at a number of practices. Nature is not all that reductionist. We many times make it reductionist by the nature of the research that we do on it because there's so many interactions going on that we're trying to kind of, get control over a number of them. But the reality is all these things are interlinked. And so when we sit down for addressing things like resiliency, erosion control, we're looking at a number of different practices. In this example, crop rotation, residue management, cover crops, contouring, and strip cropping. One example of kind of an innovative aspect that we've done, and this is, I mentioned early on that the regulatory approach has its place, has its value, but of course our agency is all about the voluntary approach to conservation. But here there are ways where we, I think in an innovative way, have worked with our voluntary approach to help people meet their regulatory standards and their regulatory requirements. This was a combustion system improvement standard that we developed in the San Joaquin Valley of California. There's an air pollution control district there, and they wanted to reduce their oxides of nitrogen, referred to as NOx, and particulate matter emissions. And so we created a program where we could essentially help fund destroying old engines that were what's called a lower tier, that are more emitting of NOx and particulate matter. And just in that 4-year period, we had over 1,900 contracts, and it was essentially the equivalent of removing 750,000 cars off the California roads. We reduced NOx emissions by over 2,400 tons per year. So that's kind of one of the innovations that I would just throw out to you that we've been working on. Now, this is a real exciting major effort that we are also doing in NRCS, is our soil health campaign. And we emphasize also the word partnering here because although we have a decent budget, we've got a lot of people on the field, but this is something that we realize is also not going to happen without the help of many different partners. There's a number of steps that I've been leading our agency through in addressing this campaign. And one of them is really ensuring the scientific basis behind everything that we've done. We kind of really have a situation where there's a lot of farmer excitement, but farmer testimonials of some of the processes they've been using. And those are all really good and really powerful, but it's also important for us to understand, you know, like how far we can generalize these types of systems, you know, across different climatic zones, different soils, you know, different cropping systems. We need to really kind of have that scientific basis, you know, for what that is doing, like Max is interested in and for his microbial ecology project there. Another thing that we're doing is working on evaluating the economics, and we've been funding a project, but we've been working with others because that's really, you know, the farmer's bottom line. So we also need to know a potential profit from these systems, but I'm kind of one of those Pollyannas where I think that to the extent that we can quantify the reductions in risk associated with these conservation practices, with these soil health practices, then it just makes sense that we ought to be able to work with our lending institutions for reducing the loan interest rate to farmers. If it's a lower risk, then they should reduce their interest rate. If it's a lower risk, then the crop insurance premium should come down, should be reflective of that. So that's another aspect that we're working on to quantify and the economic benefits and the economic risk reduction of these soil health practices. Look, we're modeling a number of benefits so that people can get an idea of what's possible. There's about 146 million acres of cropland across the U.S. that's currently in moderate to high need of additional conservation measures. We think that if we could just put no-till and cover crops on that, then we could reduce carbon loss by like 11 million tons per year and nitrogen loss by like 1.9 billion pounds per year. So that's carbon that's staying on the soil to increase resilience. That's nitrogen that's not getting in our waterways. I'll mention our SIG priorities and PMCs in a minute. We've been doing national training in the last 6 months. We've trained over 2,300 folks, and we're really jumping into that even more. A number of partnerships that I'll also mention, and a major campaign for communications. I invite all of you to look at our soil health website. There we have a number of fact sheets and stuff that we're distributing, and a number of them have been also translated into Spanish for distribution. As I said earlier, part of the an important part of this is producer experiences, and we have a number of those written up there too. And some of the partnerships that we have been working on, we've been working with Monsanto, Nature Conservancy, National Corn Growers, Environmental Defense Fund, National Association of Conservation Districts, National Grazing Lands Coalition. Everyone is just all excited about this effort and it's really coming to the table. Just this 4 months ago in February, we held a project, or a conference I should say, with USDA SARE program, and it was partly funded by the Buffett Foundation. And one of the things that we did in NRCS is we enlisted the folks of our across the country, and we had over 230 forum locations for people to go in and listen to a live webcast of the presentations from that conference in Omaha. But then we distributed these facilitation help kits to each of them, and so we had a facilitator identified at each of these locations. We had them invite farmers in, and so we made sure that they invited like early adopters, but also non-adopters. And so then if for example a non-adopter said, well, you know, I'm worried about this cover crop, how it might influence the yield of my next crop or whatever, any types of barrier they might bring up, then the other adopters were there to talk about how they had overcome those barriers. And so we touched like over 6,000 farmers in that one morning of that conference. We have also a number of plant material centers that are working on nationally coordinated projects across the U.S. For example, one of them is looking at different cover crop mixes, species, seeding rates, different soils, climates, cropping systems. And then we have a Conservation Innovation Grants program is one of the other programs that I lead. I would just point out, I think we're running a little late. Where did that clock go? There it is. Running a little bit behind. But I won't read it all, but basically looking at projects that for evaluating renewable energy systems, for reducing environmental contaminants, and also for demonstrating and quantifying impacts of soil health promoting practices. Another one of the innovations that we've been working on is really in the field of environmental markets. The Prairie Pothole region in the U.S., kind of north and central plains area of the U.S. and Midwest, it's just home to habitat for this, and that whole migratory flyway. And it's just real critical habitat. And unfortunately, a lot of the grasslands are being plowed up. Just prices of corn and the price of land and these things, and just a lot of things are driving it. But a lot of the grasslands are being plowed up. A lot of the small wetlands called potholes are being drained. And so one of the projects that we funded through the Conservation Innovation Grants program is really to provide an incentive for landowners to help them maintain that area in grass and not to convert it to cropland. And so there we've been working with Ducks Unlimited through the Conservation Innovation Grants program. And I should back up and say this Conservation Innovation Grants program, we had a particular offering just focusing on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and increasing carbon sequestration. And we had it's like about 13 projects that we funded for just over $5 million. I think it was $5.3 million. And this was one of those projects. We're essentially helping pay the farmer through their selling of their carbon credits to keep that land in grass. Is really kind of what it boils down to. And our Conservation Innovation Grant was really kind of help for set up for accounting for that carbon, kind of setting up the registry, verification protocols, those types of things. There's quite a bit to it, and so those were some of the steps that this helped fund. But there's a different aggregator of part of with working with farmers on a voluntary basis is there are a lot of privacy issues, and so that's another reason why it's important to have an aggregator so that you're not just identifying who's not participating. But we do expect a major announcement by this summer or early fall by a major U.S. automobile manufacturer, and that's as specific as I can be, that is going to be purchasing these carbon credits. And so we think this is just going to really give it a lot of legs, and it's going to be kind of a real opportunity and wake-up call for a number of folks of this type of opportunity for help preserving our grasslands. And again, a lot of this is preserving resilience. Kind of get back to the theme of resilience, because once you plow that, guess where the carbon's going? It's going right up. It's carbon dioxide. It's mineralization of that soil organic matter. The microorganisms working on it, and they're giving it off as CO2. Another thing that we're working on that's kind of innovative is our carbon management evaluation tool called COMET. And their individual grower and our conservation planners can work with growers to identify their particular area on the field, and then look at a number of different scenarios, for example, no tillage, and look at the carbon benefits and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Another thing that we have been doing is getting all of our presentations. We work with a number of folks all across the country. Now we have one central location where all these conservation webinars, we have about 200 or so. Now they're available for anyone. They're in the public domain. Anyone can get in there and get trained. I think last count, Max, we had about 22 of them on soil health. So now you know what you're going to do with your summer vacation. I think it's probably about the last point I'll bring up. I know that there's been a lot of interest and quite a bit of press on the USDA climate hubs. This is something that another gentleman that I work with is leading. I helped kind of organize it, put some of it together and the organizational structure behind it, but then step back and another guy's leading it right now, a gentleman named Dave Smith. But this is basically an opportunity and an effort and a responsibility for USDA agencies to work together, bringing in the latest research that's regionally appropriate for those producers, landowners in that region, and bringing the climate data to bear, the resiliency data, the cropping systems, the tillage practices, these types of things, all the different kind of roles and responsibilities that different agencies have to address these. And then I would just end by saying, although I've been focusing and kind of mentioning resilience, when we designed these conservation plans for landowners, we're really looking at multiple benefits here. I will end there. I think I'm getting the hook. Paula?
Yes, we have time for maybe one quick question, and then at the end we have 10 to 15 minutes for discussion and for both of our speakers. Any quick in the back?
I see a question right here. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Very brief question. My personal hobby horse. Why are cities not supporting this? Why are they not partners in funding this for their own benefits from this tremendous array of benefits provided by open space, agriculture, ecosystem, etc.?
You say, why are cities not doing it?
I know New York City has a separate program. Why not
you know,
every city?
Well, obviously, I can't speak for them, but I will say that I think that there's increasing interest in it. I know that we have, through our Conservation Innovation Grants program, there's a group called the U.S. Endowment for Forestry that has worked with some cities. I believe that project was in North Carolina, where they helped essentially develop an easement on forested land of a watershed that was providing, the source water for that city. And so I think it's increasingly recognized that those types of arrangements are really valuable and are a really good investment. It's so much better to have good conservation treatments on the land and more cost-effective, frankly, than to try to treat the water and remove nutrients, sediment, contaminants after it's already in the water. It's a good question.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.